Without any further ado, we will get started with the class. Today's class, we will be continuing with the 9th chapter of Kohelet. We've been kind of slowly going through it. Actually, before we begin with any of that, let me put our link in the chat. That's what we do. The link is there in case you'd like to review anything or catch up on anything. It's all there in our on our website. So please feel free to go check that out. And you can also use the chat feature to respond throughout the session if you'd like. You can always just pipe in also. Okay, so with that, we are in chapter 9, and we're going to be starting with verse number 13. So we just got ended with an idea, and there's going to be actually a pretty distinct statement that distinguishes between these coming verses and the last verse. So we will say that they are not connected directly. However, even though they're not directly connected, they actually do share some. They share a certain theme. And I think we'll explore that as we get into it. Interestingly enough, is with these verses we're going to see a mashal, a parable. It's going to give us a direct parable with these coming verses. So if it seems like a story, it is. But to make that, in order to do that, in order to understand the full scope of the story, we may have to go a little quicker through a couple verses. That way we at least get the full picture. That once we have that, we can kind of go back and revisit it, if that makes any sense. Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump into the share screen. And in this first verse, actually, this is a very short verse, but there are a number of things that still kind of stand out about it. Again, this is chapter 9, verse number 13. It says, Gam zo, also this, re'iti, I have seen, chokhmah, wisdom tachat hashamesh, under the sun. So wisdom under the sun, ugdola hi alai. And this is big for me, right? This is big on me, literally on me. Or I would think it would mean just to say, this is a big deal for me, okay? Interesting, I think, let's read it one more time, actually, before we discuss it. Gam zo re'iti, this also I have seen, chachma, wisdom, tachat hashamesh, under the sun, ugdola hi alai, and this is big on me, okay? This is a big deal for me. It's kind of how I would translate it. Okay, so very clearly,
say that I have a lot of wisdom under the sun, do you?
I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying that this coming idea is something that he feels is a big deal, which perhaps big deal, or perhaps it personally affects him, I would say, is maybe another option. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's a condition that occurs amongst the wise, is what we're going to see. So that being the case, this is going to have large ramifications for him, for wisdom people in general. Okay, the main idea being over here that you see that he is separating from the last point. He's saying this coming thing also is a big deal for me. This also I have seen. This is a factor or a feature of wisdom under the sun, but it's a big deal for me. Okay, I think it's interesting that he admits his own feelings about this topic. So whereas he's generally dealt with wisdom in a I would say kind of from an arm's length, and he says, he's talking about the feature and the nature of wisdom. Here he's going to say, he's getting a little personal. He's saying that this is a big one for me. I just think it's interesting in general. If you actually go through the different books of Tanakh, you will find different voices, different. I don't know if that word came through. Different voices. So you'll find that there are kind of different ways people talk. And even in the 5 books of Moses, for example, the 5 books of the Torah, you notice that if you look through it, the first 4 books are written in a certain way. There's just like it's mostly a narrative. It's God's voice speaking. And then in the last book, which is Deuteronomy, Dvarim, it's primarily written by Moses. Again, it's not any less of a book, and it's not prophecy. It definitely is prophecy. However, you get a little bit more of Moses' voice that shows up through it. So here also, it's interesting that whereas he's kind of, again, approached every discussion so far a little distant, he adds himself into it pretty well. But even though there's a little bit level of distance, you'll find that over here he's saying, I've got this one's personal to me. Gedula hi Eli. This is big on me. Okay, it rests on me heavily. Okay, so again, I find that interesting. And as always, we have to point out that Tachat Hashamesh this is a nature. This is what happens within this world, this worldly nature, as opposed to some sort of spiritual feature. Again, he is talking about this is something that is under the sun. If he hasn't made that clear many times already through the book, here's one more comment. We're talking about wisdom under the sun. Okay. All right, not necessarily so much to get from this verse over here, except for the fact that he's introducing the next thing. Okay, and what he does is he gives us a parable. As I mentioned in our intro, these verses are going to be in a form of a parable. And he says like this: Ir kitana, there's a small city. V'anashim ba ma'at, and there are only a few people in it. Uva eleha melech gadol, and a large king comes against the city. V'savav ota, and surrounds it. Uvana aleha mitzodim gedolim, and builds against it large. Mitzodim are towers. Okay, he builds some sort of siege weapon against the city. Okay, now let's read that one more time. Ir Kitana, there's a small city. Va'anashim ba ma'at, and there are few people in it. Uva eleha melech gadol, and a large king, a big king comes against it. V'savav ota, and surrounds it. Uvana aleha mitzodim gedolim, and builds these siege machinery against the city. Okay, so there's a number of things we just have to address over here right off the bat. Is that this word, first of all, this word mitzodim. We just 3 verses ago, we also had he also mentioned mitzudim, but they have different meanings. Interestingly enough, is he uses 2 words within just a couple verses of each other that are spelled the same, but actually have different meanings. This was a couple verses ago when we said, actually last week's verse, where he talked about how we are all like birds, like fish that run into nets or whatever. Fish that bite a fish hook, and like birds that fall into a net, meaning we bring our own troubles onto us sometimes. There he said the nets he referred to, the bird nets were referred to as mitzodim. Here we also have the word mitzodim. However, it has a different meaning. There, you just scroll up so we could see it. That was, right over here. We had kedagim shnechazim bin soda. You have fish that are caught. This is the fish hook. You have fish that are caught in a trap, fish hook. Okay, so there the shoresh, the Hebrew root of the word is tzad, which means to trap. Okay, it's actually one of the 39 things 39 families of things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat, is we're not allowed to trap things, deer and things like that. Okay, or fish for that matter. Okay, so there the word is tzad, the shoresh, the root of that word is entrapment. Here the word is mitzudah. Okay, a mitzudah is a tower. Perhaps there's a relationship between the two. In fact, there's almost for sure a relationship between the two. That a tower is also some sort of thing to either guard or to guard things within. We find that in the sages, when they in the Mishnah and Talmud, we find that mitzodah is usually referred to as a large cabinet. Again, the word literally means a tower. But in this case, it's some sort of siege equipment. The idea is it's something that you use to protect or to lock in, to hold in something. So either it's to hold something inside of itself, in the case of a cabinet, or it's to hold people within a city, like siege equipment. So that's what we're dealing with over here. The king, this bad king, goes ahead and builds the siege equipment to go against the city. Okay, in my mind, I think of like the Romans. They would build these large towers that would come, and they would use them to come right up against the walls of a enemy city, and they were protected from arrows, and they were able to scale the walls of cities. If you've ever been to Masada in Israel, you can get a little sense of how Roman siege worked. So here also we've got a story of a little city with a few people and this enemy king. I keep on almost saying wicked. Doesn't say it is a wicked king. There is a large king, being a powerful king, that comes and builds these siege weapons. A number of the commentaries point out that this is a double feature, so to speak. It's a small city, meaning it doesn't have that much to begin with, and then compounded on top of that is there's not many people in there. So basically, in a natural sense, there's no reason why this city should survive the onslaught of this other king that comes and takes it. Okay, and we're going to find in the next verse that somebody comes and saves the city. The sages over here have many interpretations as to what this verse is referring to, that range from the social to the historical to some sort of self-perfection theme. For example, it talks about the sages understand that the small city is referring to the human body, which only has a few limbs on it, a few usable limbs, and we're attacked by our inclination to do the wrong thing, what we, so to speak, call as the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. We are oppressed by this need to do things which we shouldn't do, and so wisdom is going to come and save the day, right? If you have enough wisdom, that'll come and save the day. They give it also another explanation that it's referring to the land of Egypt, for example. So the land of Egypt, which at the time when we went down, when the sons of Israel went down to Egypt, so there were only 70 people. So there were only a few people who went down, and then the evil king Pharaoh went ahead and tried to make us work for him, and then Moses came and saved us. Or they say also another example of the land of Egypt is where the land of Egypt, which had this famine coming to it, and then Joseph comes and saves the city, or saves the society of Egypt. So they have all these different interpretations. Again, some of them are social, and some of them are historical, and there's a number of different ways that the sages look at it. But I think it's interesting to just take a step back, and instead of figuring out directly if it's referring to a specific moment in history, a moment in time, I think it's good to just kind of look at the case itself, look at the parable itself, without any preconceived notions. I mean, we could go ahead and understand this verse is referring to a specific moment in time or a specific case, or we could let's take a second and look at the full picture and see if something just kind of arises out of just building this story. Okay, it's a parable that we could just look through and inspect and see how it shows up. So again, you have this small city, and this king, for some reason, comes and decides it wants to besiege the city. One more word that just needs some translation over here is savav. Savav means to surround. It's the sav means to encircle. So which is why a dreidel, for example, in modern Hebrew is referred to as a sivivon, because it spins, it goes in a circle. Okay, so savav means it encircles. The king encircles the city and builds against it these siege weapons. Okay, we can't talk about too much about it until we see the rest of the story. Okay, and the story only continues for one more verse. And that is, again, verse number 15, in chapter 9, verse number 15. And the story continues like this. Umatzaba, and there's found inside the city, Ish, a person, Miskain, who is poor, P-O-O-R, poor, Chacham, who is also wise, Umilat hu et ha'ir, and he saves the city, v'chachmato, with his wisdom. V'adam lo zachar et ha'ish hamiskein hahu, and people do not remember this poor man. Okay, let's read that again. Umatzava ish miskein chacham, And we find in the city a man, a poor, wise man, umalathu et ha'ir, and he saves the city. Sorry, umilathu et ha'ir. He saves the city, v'chachmato, with his wisdom, v'adam lo zachar, and people do not remember, et ish hamiskenahu, this poor man. Okay, so there's, again, a number of things that show up right away. First of all, we need to translate some words. The first one is miskein. Miskein, this is not so common in Tanakh. It does show up a number of places. A miskein is a poor person. The shoresh, the Hebrew root of the word, is sakan, which literally means danger. Okay, somebody who is poor is inherently in danger. Okay, they lack the basic needs for their survival, so that's going to put them in danger. So miskein, however, even though miskein should literally mean a person in danger, it's not used in that way. Miskein is used to refer to a poor person. In fact, we find that in the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation of the Torah written by, or given over to us by Onkelos, the convert, who this is first century or so. So when he talks about, whenever poor, someone who's poor is brought up in the Torah, for example, if there's a mitzorah, somebody who has the affliction of tzarat, which is unfortunately mistranslated as leprosy. It's not leprosy, but anyway, if somebody is afflicted with tzarat, if they're poor, the sacrifice that they have to bring afterwards is a different sacrifice. So there, Onkelos refers to the poor person as miskena, right? This is somebody who is poor. Okay, it's used in modern Hebrew, just meaning, so, poor soul. Oh, miskein, so the poor soul. But literally, again, the word may mean in danger, literally, but in all intents and purposes, it means somebody who's poor. So this is a poor, wise person. Well, milat means to save, to render salvation. Okay, trying to think of other cases where it shows up that would, given more of a context. It's going to differ from hitzil. Hatzalah is another form of salvation. I'd have to think for a second, what's the difference between umilat, and vihitzil? I'm not sure. I have to think about it for a second. I have to think about where else we find that. Okay, I have to put a little thought into it. Perhaps it'll come to me. So anyway, he saves the city. It's possible that it means to save from the inside. I have to think about that again. I'm sorry, I have to think about it some more. I should have considered that before we started. Anyway, he saves the city with his wisdom. The Adam, and people do not remember this poor man. Okay, Adam literally means man, but we have a difference between Ish and Adam. Right? There's Ish, this poor man, and then there's Adam lo zachar, a man does not remember, or a human, I guess, is kind of difference between man and a human, which are basically interchangeable, but they're not. There's a different sense that's given over. When we say Adam in general, when we say Adam, this is a theory of mine, and I think it proves true if you go through, if you walk through Tanakh, you'll find that this is generally true. Is Adam is a reference to society as a whole. Okay, in the sense that Adam himself, the first human being, when he was alive, when he was first created, that was humanity. That was the whole thing right there. He was everybody. Now, over time, that changed. Obviously, he had children, and etc. But in general, when we use the word Adam, we're referring to society as a whole. Okay, so as opposed to Ish, which would mean an individual person, Adam would be used to refer to society. So when we say that this poor man saved the city, however, humanity, people as a whole, forget the person himself, forget the poor man. And you notice something interesting over here, which is that at the beginning of the verse, the person has one noun, I guess, and two adjectives. He is the poor, wise man. Okay, so he is a man, but he is poor and wise. Interestingly, that poor is put before wise. Then later in the verse, we find that all he's referred to as is Ish HaMiskein, the poor man. It doesn't mention anything about his wisdom. And in fact, we're going to see that it gets worse in the next verse. I'm not doing the next verse quite yet, but just to jump down, all it refers to him is as, sorry, all it refers to him as is hamiskein, just refers to him as the poor one. He stops even referring to him as a man. Okay, so he starts off as the poor wise man. He continues as the poor man and ends up as just the poor one. He loses his status of ish, interestingly enough. So here we have a very interesting hero who is saving the city, but King Solomon, before he gets anywhere, before he tells us anything, he doesn't even bother telling us anything. He says, and humanity forgets this poor man. Okay. And doesn't just forget the poor man, drops the status of wisdom. So there's a couple of things that stood out to me specific, straight up in this verse is, and in the whole parable, for example, is that this poor man, it never tells us what happened. It gave us some level of description by how the king, the enemy king, came and besieged the city. He surrounded it. He built these armaments, these siege weapons, and then when the wise man saves the city, it says nothing about how he does it. All he says is he saves the city with his wisdom. And if we continue on with the parable, you'll find that he never mentions anything about how the city was saved, which makes an interesting, which changes your perspective on what this verse over here is doing. Meaning, if I were to look if I were to hear a parable, okay, we're going to go through a parable right now. In fact, if you're around Judaism long enough, you'll notice we have a lot of parables, got a lot of stories, and a lot of them have kings, and a lot of them have wise men, and all sorts of things. So if I were to just hear, okay, we have a story of a small town that gets besieged by the king, and a wise man comes and saves it, my intuition would tell me that our lesson is going to be about how is a wise man going to save the city from this powerful king. That's what I would think would be the focus of this verse over here. Is how did he do it? What did he do? Did he did he get burning oil, or did he raise an army out of nothing, or did he pray to God, or nothing is told to us. We had no mention at all of what exactly happens in this battle. Okay, it's interesting enough that it's similar almost to King Solomon's great grandson Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, the king who was besieged. He was holed up in Jerusalem. All the remainder of the Jewish people were holed up in Jerusalem as Sancheiriv. I do not know how to say that in English. Sancheiriv was the king of Assyria. He came and he had besieged Jerusalem for, I think, 3 years. It was almost the end of everything. And in one night, the Jewish people are saved. The prophets tell us that an angel came down and smote the army of Sancheiriv. So smote the Assyrian army and killed everyone besides for 2 sons of Sancheiriv who lived to tell the tale, basically. Okay, so it's also almost a similar tale of this, this people who are stuck. There's nowhere to go, nowhere to run, and a salvation comes out of nowhere, right? So in other words, what I see is it doesn't matter. The point of this lesson, the lesson we're going to bring out is not about how the wise man goes and saves the city. That's not what we're focused on. Instead, we're focused on the social ramifications of this happening, or the social ramifications of wisdom coming and saving the people from their problems. And he says right off the bat, the number one problem, the thing that shows up right away, is people do not remember the poor man. Forget the fact that they don't even remember that he was wise. They forget the whole story. They forget him, and we don't even refer to him as a wise man anymore. Okay? Before we dissect it even more, I want to go one more verse before we take it apart any further. All right, verse number 16. Again, this is chapter 9, verse number 16. And he says, Va'amarti ani, and I say, King Solomon says, I say, Tova chachma migvura, wisdom is greater than strength. Okay? I would tell you that wisdom is greater than strength. However, the chachmat hamiskein bezuya, the wisdom of this poor person, again, dropping the man, this poor person is disgraced. udvarav einam nishma'im, and his words are not listened to. Okay, so again, va'amarti ani, and I say, tova chachma migvura, that wisdom is greater than strength. Nevertheless, I'm kind of reading in it. Nevertheless, the chachmat miskin bizuya, the wisdom of the poor person is disgraced. Udvarav einam nishma'im, and his words are not heard. Okay, so again, a fascinating thing where you would expect there to be celebration, right? This guy comes and saves the city. You would think we would make statues of the person. You'd think we'd put him on a pedestal. Nevertheless, what happens is he's forgotten entirely, and he loses his status. He goes from Ish Miskein Chacham to Ish Miskein to just Ha Miskein, right? He just goes down to the status of the poor one. And not only that, but his wisdom is disgraced. The wisdom that he did offer becomes disgraceful. And this is an interesting thing, because what I'm seeing over here is harping on this fact over and over again, that the person is a miskein, that the person is a poor person. Okay, that's what I noticed over here, because as we said, his adjectives have been dropping away one by one, and now the term miskein, which actually was originally an adjective, is now the noun. It's now become the subject. He is the miskein. He is the poor person, right? The poor one. Okay, not a poor man. Is the poor one. What I see over here is an interesting commentary on how people look at wisdom in general. And they see the wise people, but in order for the words of the wise to be heard, to be listened to, it can't come from a lowly source. People don't listen if it comes from a lowly source. That's kind of what I'm seeing over here, where you have the fact that it doesn't matter that this person went ahead and saved the day. If it wasn't for him, for this guy, for this wise poor man, if it wasn't for him, there would be nothing. The whole city would have been lost. But people don't want to recognize him. People refuse to recognize him because he's not the guy. He's not the guy that we hoped he would be. He's not the guy we really wanted to be the one to save us. His wisdom is not appreciated because he's stuck in a social situation where he is a miskein. He is a poor person. In other words, if this was the wealthy, handsome man who saved the city, no one would forget the wealthy, handsome man who saved the city. It's due to the fact that he is a poor, wise man that we forget everything about him. We even forget his own humanity. We don't pay attention to the fact to him at all because he is a poor man. So again, what I see over here is a social commentary that King Solomon is telling us that look how much is lost, how much wisdom is lost because of who holds it. There's a very famous story in the Talmud, for example, that was Rabbi Hoshua. I forget which Rabbi Hoshua was. There were a number of Rabbi Hoshuas. I think it might have been Rabbi Hoshua ben Hanania, who was a big rabbi in the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, and he was close to the family of the Caesar. Okay, when the Talmud refers to Caesar, I always wonder if it means the Caesar himself or some sort of other dignitary, diplomat, or whatever. Anyway, the story goes, as it was reported in the Talmud, that he was not a very good-looking man, and he was approached by the daughter of the Caesar and was asked, how is it possible that such wisdom is in an ugly vessel? And so he says, great question. What a wonderful comment to say about my looks. Great question. I don't have an answer for you right now, but I do have a question for you. And she says, go ahead. And he says, what does your father keep his wine in? What kind of barrels does he keep his wine in? And she said, they keep them in earthenware barrels. And he says, well, it's not appropriate. They should be in gold and silver barrels. She says, you know what, you're right. So she goes behind her father's back and has the servants all switch it out for gold and silver barrels. and the wine all goes bad, right? The preservation of the wine was not good. They ended up with a bunch of vinegar. And the Caesar, or whatever position he was, gets very upset at his daughter and says, well, who told you to do this? She says, Rabbi Hanania. Bishua ben Hanania told me to do it. And so they call him Bishua ben Hanania, and they ask him, why'd you say to do this? And he explained that, well, look at this is what your daughter asked. She asked, is it possible that such wisdom is in such an ugly vessel? And I'm trying to prove to her that the vessel, it has nothing to do with what vessel it's in. It does have to do with what vessel it's in. It has to be, wisdom is not necessarily kept in good vessels, right? It might be kept in an ugly vessel. To which the Caesar responds and says, I know some pretty good looking rabbis, right? Just because they're good looking doesn't mean that they're going to lose, that they don't have wisdom. I know some good looking rabbis. Kind of a funny thing to say also. To which he responds, if they were ugly, they would be smarter. They would have more wisdom if they were ugly, which is just an interesting comment, and it's, again, this is separate from what we're learning, from what we're seeing over here. But you do get this sense that wisdom almost thrives more amongst a poor wise man, for example, or an ugly vessel or something like that. Wisdom it's possible to find wisdom in, so to speak, all the wrong places, right? You could find wisdom amongst, you can find wisdom amongst the good-looking, the well-connected, etc., the wealthy. However, what we find is that the true wise person in this case is this Miskain. If it wasn't for this moment in history, for this king coming and besieging the city, then then we would never have even known about the guy. And the fact of the matter is, we forget the guy as soon as he's gone, because people are hyper-focused, they're overly focused on those heuristic elements. I remember learning about this a while ago in one of my college courses, is that there's this concept of heuristics, of certain things catch people's attention and their brains can't let go of it for some reason. So it's kind of this, the research shows, right, just a glimpse at history would show that most of the time, most presidential elections, the taller candidate wins. Okay, just something about height speaks to people. They see a presence, right? So the taller candidate wins. All right, so meaning that's a strange thing. It should really be, we should really, we should elect people because of their policies and what they think about the issues, which, as if people did that. However, in reality, people look to certain leaders because of who they are, because of how they present themselves, because of how they are situated in society. It's kind of a strange coincidence, I would say, that in the founding of America, George Washington was wealthy, handsome, tall, and an incredible general and an incredible statesman. It's a rare combination to have all those things. Now, who knows? Maybe there was another person who would have done a better job, but we don't remember him. We don't remember any other person because somebody else took the stage, so to speak. And that's just the reality of things. So what we see over here is King Solomon telling us that lots of wisdom can be lost. The opportunity to access wisdom can be lost if and because we focus on these heuristic elements, these side features of people that don't really have anything to do with their wisdom, but the nature of things is that we don't focus on the person, we don't focus on the wisdom themselves. The wisdom, as he says in the last verse, the wisdom specifically is lost, is forgotten, right? The wisdom of, it's in this verse. The wisdom of the poor man, of the poor person, again, lost his man. The wisdom of this poor person is bizuyah, it's disgraced. Buzz means, buzz is an interesting word. It can mean disgraceful. It could also mean booty, as in booty that's picked up from a war or something like that. To sack things is buzz. So bizuyah means it's thrown away by the wayside. So because of the fact that this person is Miskain, we could dress him up in so many things. He's smart. He's a man. Nevertheless, what people notice is the Miskain, is the fact that, oh, he's not well connected socially. He's a poor person. He's not even a man. He's a poor person. So because of that, Devarav einam nishma'im, his words are not heard. Okay. So in other words, it's almost, I would say that the takeaway, which is going to be fleshed out in the coming verses too, which we'll get into next week. But the takeaway is, think about who you're getting when you're getting your wisdom from somewhere, when you're looking to people for wisdom. Perhaps broaden your search a little bit, because you might be losing track. You might be forgetting a certain source of wisdom. Maybe somebody has actually some really good ideas, but they're just placed wrong in the social structure. In the same way how we said last week, we said that King Solomon says, alas, I look at the world and I find that the wise people are lacking of bread, okay? Or people don't take advantage of their time, and they lose track of things, and next thing you know, they're not progressive. They don't move with the skills that they have when they have them, and they lose out in the long run. So perhaps you may find that if you're looking for your salvation, if you're looking for wisdom to guide you, perhaps broaden your search and see who else is around. There may be somebody who you're overlooking because they are the miskane. This is, again, that I think that's half of the takeaway. The rest of the takeaway will really come out in the coming verses next week, God willing, next week, when he talks about certain features of how you could pinpoint, how do you find the wise in the crowd, I guess. How do you find the wise person when their spotlight is being taken by other people who are just more socially connected? So again, with this verse, I think the idea is that it is to one takeaway would be, look at it, who else is there. Maybe you have a wise person who, due to some mistakes, ends up in the wrong, without any bread. You have a fast person who loses the race, or we said last week, steady wins the race, not necessarily slow and steady, just steady wins the race, right? So maybe perhaps you have this showing up in any other way, but there is wisdom there, and don't lose that wisdom. And he says, Gedolei Alai, as we saw in the first verse. This is a big one for King Solomon. He personally connects to this lesson, which again is interesting. We'll have to think more about why that is, why that's specific to him. Okay, I won't belabor that point any further. Let's go back to the main screen here. All right. Thank you again for joining us. God willing, we should be meeting back here next week. I can't think of any reason why not at this point.